Good afternoon. I'm going to be presenting to you today the chapter by Murray Rothbard in The Myth of National Defense titled War, Peace, and the State. And in honor of Murray, I have decided to bring the signature Austrian. Oh, okay. What's that? So the title of my presentation is A Market Conception of Defense Production. And where we begin is with the Libertarian Theory. And Murray Rothbard describes the Libertarian Theory eloquently in one of the opening paragraphs that I will read to you. The fundamental axiom of libertarian theory is that no one may threaten or commit violence, aggress, against another man's person or property. Violence may be employed only against the man who commits such violence, that is, only defensively, against the aggressive violence of another. In short, no violence may be employed against a non-aggressor. Here's the fundamental rule from which can be deduced the entire corpus of libertarian theory. So what Rothbard is trying to explain is that in the libertarian theory, what is the most important thing to understand and appreciate is that this is a theory of peace. It's a theory of nonviolence, and that applies both to an individual person as well as a group of people. Even if that's a collective group on a larger scale with nationality, such as the nation state. And his conception of defense, I think, can best be explained by using a similar economic analysis of Crusoe economics. But in our theory for deducing war and peace, I would like to take Crusoe from his deserted island and put him in the forest. Now, when Crusoe is in the forest, he's isolated, yet the animals and organisms around him, they cannot comprehend property rights. Actually, in the forest, it's very interesting. It is the nature of violations of property rights. Animals eating other animals, organisms infecting wherever they want to. But it's not until we introduce Friday into the forest that we begin to develop our libertarian analysis. So Crusoe and Friday both build their separate camps, and they can live peacefully amongst each other. But the issue that we're trying to develop is in the societal level. As a civilization, how can we approach and apply the libertarian theory to the concepts of aggression and violence? And Rothbard explains that, say for example, C commits a violent act against A. Now, what can A do about this? And if A is Crusoe, I think we can use this forest premise to deduce the proper punishment theory, in a sense. And take, for example, you're Crusoe in the forest, and an animal enters your camp. Your first instinct is maybe to scream, but you'll yell, "Get out!" You want the animal out of your property. And this is a normal justification for your own peace and safety. You don't know if this animal is dangerous to you. And so what you could do is you could create some sort of gauntlet to get the animal out the door or the window. Now, if the animal is potentially very harmful, you might have to catch it first. Make it non-threatening to you. And once you catch it, you can choose to release it, or you can choose to kill it. However, what Murray Rothbard is trying to explain is that it wouldn't make sense for you to aggress onto B, because B has nothing to do with the violence committed from C. So the only proper way to justify violence in a defensive manner would be against the perpetrator. And so Murray is a little bit vague in his punishment theory, and so I've tried to think out what libertarian punishment theory goes into. And he uses the term repel. So B would have the right to repel A, as well as A have the right to repel C, but in the case A can't repel C, the violence is committed. And so in punishment theory, under statism, we have incarceration. This is putting people in prisons, putting them in jail cells. I think that it's a little bit inhumane, especially on non-violent crimes such as drug usage, as well as the death penalty. And Murray Rothbard uses the concept of killing. Even Robert Nozick said that the best punishment for murder would be to take the perpetrator of the crime into a chamber and the victim into a chamber and flip a switch to transfer the life into the victim. But I think in the free market we can do better than that. And that is why in the free market alternative for punishment, there would be things like restitution. Getting the criminal to pay a certain amount back to the victim. And there wouldn't be courts. That's a statist concept. There would be arbitration and mediation. But I think we'd also have rehabilitation centers. And I think what's also very interesting is we can develop a diagram of crime where at the beginning, at the lowest level, would be property theft. So this is where, your car, your money, your shirt is stolen from you. Above that, we would have physical conscription. I think the types of crime we would see is conscripting someone to use their body in ways they don't want to. So this would be like slavery. Incarceration would be another example. Taking them, having them give up the freedom they have of their body. And at the top level would be murder, where this is a spectrum of violence. Murder obviously being the foregoing of life. Now, it could be debatable whether the physical conscription of someone's body could be worse than murder, than killing them. But I won't go into that right now. And so, in this spectrum of tension, what you see is I've used the words D's just out of convenience. But anarchy encompasses this, okay? It's important to remember that violence, the hegemonic relationships of the state and its subjects, or slaves and its servants, are in some ways violent acts. But anarchy includes violence in it. Just to keep in mind, violence created the United States. So violence isn't always the worst thing that could be in a society. You can think all day of crazy concepts to justify violence, such as would you kill baby Hitler? I don't know, but it's interesting. So, going into the production of defense, to remember that the moral justification for the state in the first place was that the market can't provide this service, and we need an overarching collective organization of protection for the people. But all the countries in the world are in a state of anarchy with one another. There is no overarching hierarchy amongst them. As well as the concept of asymmetry. This is of vital importance because there is a distinct operation of functionality between bureaucracies, such as how the nation states operate, and the free markets. So, asymmetry is something like this. Take a lie. I can tell you 100 truths, but if I tell you one lie, you'll consider me a liar. Or murdering. I cannot murder 99% of the people I walk by. But if I murder one person, that makes me a murderer. And the same thing applies with the state. To begin, Murray Rothbard that distinguishes between two types of violence, and that is vertical violence of the state only going downwards towards its subjects in a specified geographical area that the state has control over, as well as horizontal violence, which is violence of states against states or people against other people, and as well as the asymmetry of how wars are funded. Well, they're funded through aggressive taxation and taking on debts that have to be paid off. But in a revolution or a justified punishment for a previously violent crime, these are funded voluntarily, or like free market production of defenses. It's funded voluntarily. And so when we look at the nature of the state, take this landmass as our empire, and we have the head of the empire here. It's by its nature expansionary because it doesn't use the money of its own. It uses the money of its subjects, the productive citizens, as its funding to make wars. And when it has a monopoly on security, it doesn't need to conserve its resources. So it expands into an empire through imperialism, and then once it has its defined boundaries, it begins to turn its expansionary militarized efforts inward. And this is the militarized police state, where it's really the provision of security that becomes the provision of violence. And you know, the nature of the cops is something that I won't dive into just at this moment. But the asymmetry exists with the free market. The free market doesn't operate in an expansionary manner. It operates with an inward pressure where they have to conserve the resources that they're getting paid with by the subject. So take this example. You look at the discoteca. There's the bouncers outside. The bouncers don't start beating people up in the street thinking that, you know, come inside our club, it's much safer in here than it is out there. It makes no sense for them to do that. People are going to be thinking, these bouncers in this club are crazy, I'm going to go somewhere else. And they're not going to fund this organization. This is just creating violence. So it's going back to the spectrum of violence. It's not a binary decision that either we have the state to protect us, because if the state's not there, then foreign invaders are going to come in and destroy us. It's a spectrum of violence, and it doesn't have to exist between A, B, and C just yet. When you get more people, it's Mises explained it best. He said that in the free market, all exchange is foreign exchange, and in the way that you look at the production of defense, all interactions are foreign interactions. If you have the X amount of countries we have in the world today, and you just make one country for each individual person, it makes no conceptual sense to say we're going to wage a war in the Middle East, because you don't know who you're waging the war against. You don't even know the people living like 2 blocks away from you, or the city next to you. How are you going to have nationalistic arguments with them? And so the fundamental question is, why do states make war? Well, there's enormous amounts of power to be gained and profits to be made. This helps presidents' approval ratings. And with the federal government, the human life means absolutely nothing. And if it can be leveraged in any way to further their agenda, then they would be happy to do so. And if you think I'm crazy thinking that the federal government doesn't care about human life, last summer, the federal government bombed some children in the Middle East, and they didn't even apologize, let alone no one got fired for it. So they don't care. It's a military-industrial complex with a $5 trillion honeypot that is absolutely helping people make money by sending other people's children to go die in fights to kill other people's children. War is absolutely horrible. As this quote says, politicians create emergencies and then invoke emergency powers when their power is threatened. And I'm not saying that the war on COVID had anything to do with creating a virus in a lab. What I'm saying is that the assumption was we're all in this together. And if you're not in this, you're literally killing grandma. So it's just convenient to simultaneously print 40% of all the US dollars ever created in the last 2 years. Now, just for time, I will go on into weaponry. And Rothbard distinguishes between the types of weapons. And I think this is an interesting way to observe that there's precision weapons where you can take out individual targets, like if C is the criminal, we can take him out. But if we use a gaming term, an area of effect weapon like a nuclear bomb or biological weapons, it will not only destroy C, it will have a splash damage, a radius of other objects it will affect, which could be other people as well, who had nothing to do with that. So that would be unjustified in the libertarian sense and immoral. To conclude, I want to talk about the myth of war. This is a quote by Murray Rothbard that says, "Society becomes a herd, seeking to kill its alleged enemies, rooting out and suppressing all dissent from the official war effort, happily betraying truth for the supposed public interest. Society becomes an arms camp with the values and the moral of an army on march." War is the top priority for Murray Rothbard and should be for libertarians because it's great to theorize how privatizing the trash cleaning services would be. But we're not just talking about conceptual ideas. We're actually trying to prevent from lives being lost. War makes a country look strong, but what it is the result of people's lives just being wasted. And they're celebrated, unfortunately, in coffins at funerals. I think that this idea of war is very difficult, but there's other effects to it. There's not just, I mean, right now, the suicide rate in the United States for veterans who come home is 1 in 4. So there's many implications of why war is such a horrible thing. I guess I'll leave it there. So, I guess for the debate, my most important question is the second one, but I'll read you this quote by Molinari. "War has been the necessary inevitable consequence of the establishment of a monopoly on security." Now, nationalism and the provision of security go hand in hand. And I guess the main question I want to ask you is, if there could be no more war, hypothetically, ever in the world, but the cost is you have to give up your national identity, and unfortunately, there's no American, and I would really like to, because Americans are very prideful of their nationality, so I would like to apply that question to Americans as well. But let me ask you, if you could no longer be a Spaniard, but there would be no more wars left, would you do it?
Sure.
Okay. Good. I think, unfortunately there may be some people, not in this room, of course, but in the world that would be like, well, the identity is wrapped around this nationalism. And this is what rallies people up to be, it's us. We're the good guys fighting the bad guys. Clearly we're on this side, so we must be the good guys, but you can use that with every nation. And it's just this idea that you're born here into this club that makes you have this identity that really is not unique. We study methodological individualism, not methodological collectivism. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Preguntas, cuestiones, doubts, questions? Please, let's activate the debate.
Yes. Okay. if everyone could inherent and understand the non-aggression principle, we don't commit violence, do you think there would be other reasons for violence to be committed in a society? I would think no. I would think if people understand like respect for property and other people's personal boundaries, there wouldn't be violence. Okay, we'll come back to that one because it's a little bit pretty much stuck. Let's go to the third question. Is there any justification for individuals owning area of effect weapons, specifically nuclear armament? Some libertarians say, yeah, I think every individual should have the right to own a nuke. Other people say, well, I don't even think there's a justification for everyone to have a gun. Say you move to an area that says, hey, we provide security. There's no owning guns. I'm in the camp of like in gun proliferation. I think heading in towards a more free society, we justify that in order to vote, you have to own a weapon.
To vote. Yeah. Maybe a nuclear weapon is too much.
It could be. I think it probably is. I think it is too much. So let's go back to the first original question in the middle. I don't know if we're all anarchists in this room, but for the minarchists out there who say that the reason we have the state, even though they're a bad organization, is because there is no other way to provide security. Well, what is? It's really a question more about nationality. For me as an anarchist, I don't identify as being an American. I don't know what that means exactly. I'm born in the area, and I was raised in an area. My ancestry has come from this area, but what is an American? Is it someone who's born there? Is it someone who speaks the language? But I think this is a social construct, and I think it could apply to all nationalities. And I guess in a way, I don't know if it's some sort of feedback loop, or if nationality is the dog wagging the tail of national security, or if it's the state justifying the creation of national security that then creates the ideas of nationalism. I think it's probably the latter. I think the state, as its historical creation of providing protection for a given area, has said, okay, this is our kingdom, and we are going to be called the Libertarians. And then they developed that, because going back to this quote of George Orwell, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force. But once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. And the fraud is the national identity. This is the collective. This is the we. In a world of individuals, the collectives would be in the clubs and services that you choose to identify and align yourself with. But I think that nationalism it's patriotic, but patriotism has also led to some of the worst catastrophes in human history. Yes?
Yeah, that's very interesting consideration. I think that although it appears that obviously the appearance of nation states has increased the level of blood, of killing, because the wars were much more larger in scale, but also because of the greater technology applied to obviously with the nuclear weapons and with better weapons, there's a lot more damage to it. But I think violence is not only related with nationalism or patriotism, because in other you see in history, well, there has always been a lot of wars and everything, and societies were not necessarily arranged in the shape of the form of states or nation states. There were other types of war. I think the violence, it is in the unfortunately, it is in the nature of man, that obviously if as people understands and discovers the benefits of training and obviously and collaborating in one each other, it's we tend to benefit from periods of peace, no, of a lot of peace. But unfortunately, the nature of man is not the perfect we wish.
Maybe it's not a problem of nationalism, but a problem of ideology. So if you have any kind of ideology, you are always going to have some people who are against, or theory is against you, or you are against you. So maybe if you eliminate states, maybe there's going to be more groups of people which any kind of ideology who are probably going to be against other groups of people. So maybe after that, you probably going to get other kind of states.
Well, Murray Rothbard explains that with ideology, you can definitely develop anti-humanitarian groups who would be violent, but it's only through the nation state that has been able to use mass conscription to take people and raise them to be submissive to the state and obedient and fight wars.
Yo creo que I think that not only the ideology or the nationalism are the reason to have war. In fact, I think that the future, maybe, why not, are reason to begin a war between us. The question is, if the rules are clear, eso puede no derivar a una guerra. Los nacionalismos o las diferencias entre countries son utilizadas por los estados para la guerra. De hecho, lo que pretenden es nivelar muchas veces el lenguaje, porque la Revolución Francesa querían que el único lenguaje fuese el francés, o querían vestir a todos de una misma manera. Y hay otro argumento más. Porque cuando ya está la guerra, no estoy hablando de la causa, sino ya en la guerra, cogían a mercenarios de otros países para que fuesen activos líquidos? Human that you can change between una parte de la guerra u otra. Muchas veces son las reglas, con independencia de los nacionalismos. O sea, estoy defendiendo los dos puntos de vista. One point of view, I think that can emerging a war because you and me are different. This is an pero si las reglas están claras, no tiene por qué darse. Ahora bien, los nacionalismos son utilizados por los estados para generar guerras.
That's
Es una opinión.
No, I'm totally agree with you. That's for sure. The thing is, what I meant to say is that ideology or nationalism as another kind of ideology is not the reason why you have to have a state. It's the excuse to have wars, to hide another kind of interest that the politicians have. So it's more like a marketing thing. You can sell better that idea, that ideology, than, okay, I'm going to the only monopoly of force and strength of the state. I think it's more an excuse used by the states to keep the power.
I still have to come back to the point of who do you go to war with, for what reason? If you go, say we live, there's no nations, and you just want to form an ideology with mercenaries to murder a whole bunch of people, then you're just, committing a genocide. But I think we have to keep in mind that money is an important aspect to this, and the incentives, or disincentives, if you will. So with the nation, it's very convenient through taxation to raise money for wars, right? In a free society, companies they're not expansionary. They don't make money through fighting wars. It's very costly. And as well, the disincentives. In a form of private law society, the crimes are more severe under anarchy than creating a mercenary under a state, such as the implementation of ostracization, where you become exiled from civilized society for just not even violent crimes, but not paying the restitution or the contracts that you were supposed to meet. I don't know. I think statism is more of a producer of war than any free market parasitic organization could ever produce, because it's legal. It becomes legalized. It's justified.
There is also one thing that in the 20th century made much more brutal, or it was the manipulation of money, the possibility for the state, for the national state, to increase the money supply and to bring inflation, so they could just spend the money in creating new ships or a great navy, and after the war, everything, all the citizens had to pay the bill in the form of inflation and pobreza. Because if only to wage war, you only have the taxation, then you have limitation, like all the wars that occurred before the 20th century, they had a lot of limitations. Wars were of other natural, because they had limited sources.
Yeah, I think the term is like, in the 20th century, war became like all-out war or something like that, where the increased warfare technology has allowed for a lot more catastrophic deaths as far for civilian populations and troops, compared to your only rifled armed battles with the tanks, with the airplanes, with the bombs. It became much more catastrophic. I think it's just a market distortion. The free market doesn't produce weapons of mass destruction. That's a market created by the state. You have in the free market security. You have bouncers, people with guns, but it's when the nature becomes much more aggressive, and you get the weapons of this much more aggressive nature. That's made by Raytheon, companies that are subsidized by the governments. So without the governments, without the fiat money, these companies are severely diminished. Let's just apply this to universities. The universities are subsidized by governments heavily, and they produce these studies, such as women's studies, gender studies, sociology, critical theory and social justice. These studies are interesting, but they're not the equilibrium. The equilibrium is teaching students productive things to be entrepreneurs, productive members to society. I think the issue is these studies produce students who can only get jobs back at the universities that justify the nature of the government. So it's a distortion in a society, and it comes back from the small elite known as the state. I think that will do it. Thank you.